Hello, everyone. Welcome again to the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program Teacher Certification course. My name is William, and I'll be your instructor this evening. If you can please be seated. Glad to see everybody made it back. And those that are tuning in over the internet, over Facebook, you can go to the top of the page, the Facebook page there, and click on where it says download the character manual. There's a little arrow down. You can click that and you'll find other manuals, including the acceptance unit the character unit, the acceptance unit, and also the self-control unit, which we'll be working out of tonight. And if you remember, we're on chapter 2 of the self-control unit, controlling your emotions to your advantage. And let's go ahead and turn over to page, let's see, we'll go ahead and we'll pick up on page 33, because I want to just briefly go over a little bit that Chris went over in the last class. He went over, if you remember, in the last two classes, he went over positive and negative emotions. And I want to refresh our memory on a couple things about these emotions, because emotions are normal, okay? We all have emotions. We're born with the emotions. And Chris indicated that there's nothing wrong with these emotions, whether they're positive or negative, as long as we learn to control them, because we're going to have these emotions, okay? It's just a fact of life. You're going to have positive and negative emotions, but you've got to control both your positive and negative emotions. It's the uncontrolled emotions that can get us into trouble. And on page 31, well, actually, let's go ahead and look at page 30 real quick about emotions. It says, emotions are strong physical and mental responses triggered by what we experience. And a trigger is something that starts a process. And emotions are triggered by what we hear, see, smell, taste, touch, and think. And on page 31, there was a list of negative emotions. I'm not going to go over all of them again, but we will be going over a few of them tonight that people really struggle with, and we have to take a closer look at. But I want you to just key in on the top of the page where it says, generally speaking, emotions can be categorized as either negative or positive. Uncontrolled negative emotions are hurtful and can undermine your growth, development, and your future. This is talking about your growth, development in character. Okay, it can also affect your physical growth and your growth of your mind. Think about what drugs do to the mind. Is your mind going to grow and expand? If you're using, putting chemicals in your body or over drinking, no, you're going to be in decline. You're actually going to be going backwards. Your mental health, your physical health will decline. It won't expand. Okay, even though you'll think when you're on that acid, your mind is expanding and you're discovering all the secrets of the universe. No, it's all an illusion. Okay. And you can actually feel your brain cells popping as you come off this stuff. You can actually feel them, dying and exploding in your mind, okay? And they're not growing. Okay, so uncontrolled. And also on page 32, positive emotion is the energy that fuels our moral growth and development. Positive emotions can improve the way we perceive ourselves and our interactions. They make life enjoyable. And focusing on positive emotions can actually get us through life's rough spots. And, you have to remember, too, it's been gone over in this unit that children, remember this is a junior high series here, they only recognize about 4 emotions, possibly 5 if they're on Facebook and they see some emojis, but even the emojis don't describe what those emotions really are. And, they don't go in depth like the Peaceful Solution teaching what these emotions are and what triggers them, etc. So they're pretty much left on their own. But we're going to go over a few of these emotions tonight on page 33, we're going to take a closer look at these emotions, particularly the emotions of anger, rage, jealousy, and love. Why is love on that list, you know? What's love got to do with it? Well, we'll see as we proceed in the lesson. I think before we proceed in the lesson, we'll go ahead and go back to page 30 or lesson plan 2, page D, and look at number 3, because this is what we're on right now, the step that we're on. Remember, this is the teacher certification course. We've got to remind ourselves what step we're on and what our goal is in this step. Explain to students we're all born with the capacity to experience a wide range of emotions. And the first step in effectively controlling our emotions is to become familiar with and be able to identify the variety of feelings that we have. It's important to be able to identify them, because once you be able to identify them, you'll know what you're experiencing and you'll know how to better handle that emotion. Have students turn to page 31 and 32 of their handbooks and read the section entitled Defining Emotions. And that's what Chris went over in the last class. Have students pay particular attention to the emotions of anger, rage, jealousy, and love as expounded upon in the section entitled Let's Take a Closer Look, found on page 33, which we'll be going over this evening. Emphasize that emotions, if acted upon without self-control, have the ability to negatively affect our reasoning, judgment, and our interactions. So let's go ahead and turn to page 33. And it says, let's take a closer look. Although all emotions can affect the way we behave, there are some emotions that have a greater potential to lead to negative behavior. And I think at this point, it might be a great opportunity to look at this definition. Remember, it talked about uncontrolled emotions? Let's look at the word uncontrolled. Let's show that first slide. That word uncontrolled means not controlled. The second definition is occurring or done without being stopped, slowed, or controlled. You remember the STOP acronym that we went over in the last class. I believe not the last, well, we've been mentioning it here for a few classes. That stop, think, weigh out your options or your choices, and proceed with the right choice. If you don't proceed with the right choice and you proceed with the wrong choice, you didn't quite pass the test. You know, you've got to stop, think, options, proceed with the right choice in order to practice self-control. Let's put the slide back up. Okay, so the third definition, not conducted or maintained in accordance with fixed rules, restraints, or procedures. Okay, and what are we going over in the Peaceful Solution Character Education program? But rules, proper restraints, and procedures like the STOP acronym. That's a procedure. You know, it's lined out. You know, you need to stop first, you need to think. Stop so you can let your emotions, you know, so you can calm down and let your emotions pass, so you can think clearly about what your options are in that situation. And remember, the teachers are telling you, you should not be saying, well, my option is I could kill him or I could let him live. No, you don't use negative options. Negative options are off the table, okay? You're only supposed to be considering the positive options, okay, in any situation. And then you proceed, or you go ahead with whatever option you decide on that's positive with the right choice. Remember, a right choice doesn't bring harm to yourself, anyone else, or the environment. All right, number 4 in the definition means not regulated by law with regard to possession and use. You know, remember what we learned about in the earlier units about keeping our, hands off other people's property without permission, using proper restraint, controlling, the things that we possess, the things we use, the other people's possessions, the way we need to ask first before we use them, etc. And some of the synonyms of that word uncontrolled means abandoned, intemperate, rampant, raw, runaway, unbounded, unbridled, unchecked, unhampered, unhindered, and unrestrained. These are all words that are used as synonyms of that word uncontrolled. And I'd like to take a look at unbridled, because kind of gives us an idea about, you know, how we need to control ourselves and our emotions. Now, if I don't know if you've ever seen a horse's bridle, okay, you know, where it has a bit, the horse has a bit inside of his mouth, and the bridle is the actual device you see on his head there. And it's meant to not only control the horse, you know, the speed of the horse, but the direction that the horse is going. And the person that has their hands on the reins, you know, they can actually, by the way they pull on that bridle, okay, the horse is going to move one direction or another depending on, you know, the pressure put on whatever side of that, I guess they call it the palate or whatever, or the soft part of the bone there. He's going to go in whatever direction the rider wants him to go, or whatever speed he wants him to go. Well, think of that when you're not bridled, when you don't have that control. That means you're what? Well, you're out of control. If you don't have control, you're out of control. Like that wild horse. You see the wild horses? They're just running, doing whatever, going wherever they want, doing whatever they please, right? Because they're unbridled. They don't have any restraint. There's nothing restraining them. Okay? Well, it's the same thing with us. We've got to learn to bridle a lot of things. But right now, we're talking about our thoughts. We've got to learn to control them. You know, when we start thinking negatively, we got to go, whoa, Nelly, right? Whoa, you know, restrain those thoughts, restrain those negative thoughts and replace them with positive thoughts, right? Okay, so let's go, let me get back to the reading here. So let's take a closer look at anger. Now, we're going to have a whole chapter on anger in this next chapter, okay? It's about controlling our anger. So we're going to tonight, we're just going to look at something basic here that's really an eye-opener for a lot of people when they take anger management with the peaceful solution, because anger is a very misunderstood emotion, okay? And a lot of people think anger is necessarily a bad thing. Well, no, not necessarily, okay? We all, remember I told you that anger we all become angry at times. It's a normal emotion. As it says here, anger is a normal emotion that's experienced by everyone. However, as we're going to learn, it's actually a secondary emotion. And what does that mean, that it's a secondary emotion? This means that anger is felt as a result of other emotions that have not been appropriately resolved. Now, do you see why it's important for our young people to learn what these other emotions are? Because if they can't identify the primary emotion, right? The emotion they're feeling first, whether it says here, you know, frustration, embarrassment, annoyance, and jealousy, those are all primary emotions that, if left unchecked, can result in anger. So they've got to know what these emotions are and able to identify those emotions and to deal with them appropriately, so that emotion, that first emotion, doesn't turn to anger. Okay, but even if it does turn to anger, they still need to learn how to control their anger, and we're going to learn that in chapter 3. Now, remember, anger is normal, but it's a secondary emotion. And what does that mean? Let's talk about that for a minute. For instance, it says embarrassment can lead to anger. Okay, well, let's say you're walking down the street and you're carrying some books. It's raining outside, right? And let's say you slip, or let's say you're walking with your books and you're walking a little too close to the road, and a car drives by and it sprays water all over you, you know, and you're on Main Street. And all the cars going by see you soaking wet, your books are all wet. Okay? Now, that's something that can take place, right? So you have, at that point, you got a couple choices. Because remember, everything starts with your thoughts. You can think to yourself, you stupid, you know what? And you can see all the cars looking at you, and, you know, people kind of laughing and honking and stuff, and you can think, what the are you looking at? Remember, these are your thoughts that are going on in your head. Those are called negative thoughts, right? Because they're negative thoughts because, they could lead to something. They're going to lead to negative feelings and negative actions, right? You can either think that way or you can think, oh, I probably do look kind of funny, I shouldn't have walked too close to the edge of that road when I knew there was a bunch of water right there that somebody could have sprayed me with. And you can laugh with everybody else. Okay? Or you can just simply get out of the way, go over and recover, and go inside somewhere and dry off. But you don't have to think the negative thoughts. You have a choice on what thoughts you allow in your head. Okay? But if you allow the negative thought to continue, embarrassment, has anybody ever died of embarrassment that you know of? Not that I know of. I've never read in the newspaper or seen on the news, man dies of embarrassment. Now, I have heard of people dying of, because they didn't control their anger, because they didn't, control that first primary emotion called embarrassment, and they let it go to anger, and then they let it turn to rage, which we're going to talk about next, and then they exploded, and they ended up, doing something to somebody to retaliate because they didn't control their emotions, and they ended up, getting shot or killed, put in prison, etc. So people do die when they don't control their anger. But embarrassment, it's just a primary emotion that can lead to the anger. And if we learn to control that first emotion, such as embarrassment, we can learn to control and not even get angry in the first place. Well, what about, fear? Fear can cause anger. Let's say you walk home at night, you open up the door, and, somebody jumps out from behind the door and they're, woo! How do you feel when somebody, jumps out from behind somewhere and scares you like that? Well, you feel fear. First, you feel fear. You don't get angry first. First, you're very startled and you're fearful. Now, at that point, certain thoughts can come through your mind, right? Like, you stupid little, right? Or you can stop, take a deep breath, recover, let that emotion of fear pass, count to 10, 20, 30, whatever you need to do. Go take a walk around a little bit, and then come back and calmly explain to that person that, look, you could give somebody a heart attack doing something like that, right? You don't have to allow that emotion, or those thoughts of the negative thoughts to continue in your mind. You can actually stop, use that stop. It's a perfect time to use that STOP acronym. Stop, calm down, let the emotion of fear pass. Think about how you can handle that, how you can talk to that person in that situation so you don't bring any harm to that person or yourself, and then proceed with the right choice of calmly explaining to that person that that's not something you should do because you could really hurt somebody doing that. You can actually, these pranks, I know they call them pranks, right? Pranks have killed people, pranks gone wrong, so to speak. A lot of people die from pranks, okay, that are being played on them, including scaring people, jumping out and scaring people, okay? You can actually kill somebody doing that, believe it or not. You can startle somebody where they actually have a heart attack, okay? So you got to be careful, not to be doing these things. Practice a peaceful solution. Remember, not to bring harm to somebody else. But you have to learn these things, like we're learning here. So remember, anger is normal, but it's a secondary emotion, okay? And I want you to understand something else about anger. Let's go to the next slide. Google the word anger. Just Google it, okay? These are the first pictures that popped up when I Googled anger, If you'll notice, is that really anger? Somebody, so angry that, their face is red and they're steaming, out of their ears, and they're jumping and screaming, and they're breaking things, like breaking the pencil in half or screaming at the top of their lungs. Is that anger? Oh no, that's the next one we're getting ready to talk about. See, this is why anger management's important, because that's not anger right there. That's not the face of anger. That's the face of rage. Okay? That's the face of rage, because you can get angry and not look anything like that. Okay? You can get angry. You can actually be angry and be as calm as can be. Okay? You can be angry and be as calm as can be. And you can actually learn how to control your anger in an appropriate way. Even if you do become angry, you can learn to be respectful, polite to somebody, even if you are angry, and handle that situation in a moral way. Okay? That's not the face of anger. That's the face of rage, which we're looking at next. Anger that is uncontrolled can result in rage. Now, rage is dangerous emotion that can lead to verbal and physical abuse, and in extreme cases, even death. So anger is a step up, or rage is a step up from the anger, okay? It's uncontrolled anger, okay? It's, screaming at the top of your lungs, breaking things, lashing out verbally, name-calling, using threats, using racial slurs, etc. Okay, this is rage. Okay, and I've experienced it when I was growing up, because I didn't I didn't know about how to control, that I was in control of my emotions, particularly anger. I could control that if I actually learned, to stop, calm down, let the emotion pass, okay, and then think about what my options were in that situation and proceed with the right choice. I didn't know about all that, so I just kind of did whatever I felt like doing. I didn't even know how to identify the primary emotion I was feeling that led to the anger that led to the rage, right? That's why we have to learn these steps. It's very important to know the procedures. So rage is dangerous because rage can lead to verbal and physical abuse and even death, as we're going to learn a little later. It won't be tonight, more than likely, but, Chris mentioned, there's a story that you're getting ready to read about somebody that didn't control their anger. They didn't control their thoughts. Remember, it all starts with your thoughts, okay? If you don't control the thought, then it leads to the feeling. Thoughts lead to feelings, right? And then your feelings or emotions, they lead to your actions or your behavior. And then whatever behavior you do is going to lead to rewards or consequences. So remember, let's actually look also at, let's go back for a minute and look on page 31 at anger itself, because I want to go over something with you on anger. It says anger is a strong feeling of displeasure, resentment, or hostility. Let's put up the next slide so we can look at those definitions of those words. Next slide, please. Okay, so displeasure. Remember, it's a strong feeling of displeasure. Displeasure means dissatisfaction, disapproval, or annoyance, irritation, discomfort, uneasiness, or pain. Okay? This is a strong feeling of displeasure. That's the definition. It could be pain, uneasiness, discomfort, annoyance, disapproval, or dissatisfaction. And then resentment means a prolonged feeling of displeasure at something regarded as wrong or offensive. Like you feel like somebody did you wrong. You feel like you've been treated unfairly in something. And you hang on to it for a long time. Prolonged, meaning you don't let go of it. You don't learn to control the thought. You just hang on to it, that thought, and you keep playing it around in your head, okay? And you don't deal with it the peaceful solution way, okay? And then hostility, remember, anger is a strong feeling of displeasure, resentment, or hostility. Hostility simply means unfriendliness or opposition. Unfriendliness or opposition. That means you don't agree with something, okay? You don't agree with what's being done and what's being said in a situation. That can lead to anger, okay? That is anger. It's a strong feeling of displeasure, resentment, or hostility. Don't forget those definitions because they're very important. In fact, I hope you wrote them down. If not, you can go back later and you can watch the video and go ahead and jot these down. Very important because you can't expect junior high students to know these words, okay? We don't even know them. we're not even familiar with a lot of them ourselves as adults. We really need to break it down and help them to understand. If you see a word in this book that you think that you're not too sure about, or you think you might understand, but possibly you need to look it up. Okay. And you need to write it in your book so you can clearly explain to the student what that means. When you're actually teaching the class, you can say, for instance, the one about displeasure. Well, it means dissatisfaction or disapproval, right? Pain, uneasiness, or discomfort. You can explain it to them in a simple way where they can understand it. Okay, let's look at the third one tonight in the book, jealousy. People experience the emotion of jealousy for many reasons. But one thing is certain. Jealousy that is left uncontrolled, notice that word again, right? There's the key. Uncontrolled can be a dangerous emotion. People's reputations have been damaged, some have been hurt, and others murdered because of jealousy. And jealousy is listed as a negative emotion on page 31 of this chapter. And it's defined as hostile toward a rival or one believed to enjoy an advantage. Hostile toward a rival or somebody that you think you're in competition with, okay? Like school rivalries, right? School rivalry is, like my team is better than your team. That's a rivalry. They even call it rivalry in the schools. They don't have a problem with it. They teach rivalry is okay. Our school is better than that other school. Our football team can beat that other football team. School rivalries seem to be normal, and they have in their gym, they have their jamborees and their war cries before the game, where they all go in for about an hour and they do their war cry and their chants, about how they're going to beat that other team tonight. Because you know what? We got the best team in the city, right? Okay? And it's normal for them. It's normal. But it's not normal in the peaceful solution, okay? War is not normal. War is a sign of, as we'll see later on, it's a sign that we're not controlling ourselves, okay? So jealousy, I just gave you the definition. Let's go back to page 33. And it says, jealousy that's left uncontrolled can be a dangerous emotion. People's reputations have been damaged, some have been hurt, others murdered because of jealousy. Now, there's something we do need to understand about jealousy, because it's not necessarily what you think every time. When we think of jealousy, what do we normally think of? A boy and a girl, right? A boy and a girl, or a man and a woman. A man is jealous because someone's looking at his girlfriend, or a boy in school is jealous because someone's messing with his girlfriend, looking at his girlfriend or whatever. So they become jealous because they think they see him looking at them, or they think their girlfriend's talking to somebody or whatever, and jealousy comes over them. And, for the most part, they don't know. They usually know what jealousy is. They can identify that. That's emotion that a lot of them can identify. They might not quite fully understand it, but they can identify with jealousy. But they don't know how to control it in many cases. And I'm sure you've heard how, of stalking cases where people, become so jealous and so, can't find the word in my mind right now. Obsessed with that person, they just can't get them out of their mind, and they get this idea that, well, if I can't have her or if I can't have him, nobody will. Okay? Nobody will. I love them so much that, I'll kill them before somebody else can have them. Yeah, we're going to talk about love too, because that's a really misunderstood emotion, okay? Very misunderstood. But we're gonna understand it. We're gonna not fully understand it, but we're gonna get a better understanding tonight of what it actually is. But just talk about jealousy here. So let's look at this next slide, because I want to go into a deeper definition of jealousy for you, because I want you to see it's not just all that you think. Look at the next slide, please. Next slide, please. Here's the word jealousy from the online dictionary. Now, in 1200, the year 1200, it actually meant sexual possessiveness and suspicion, which is what I just described to you. It's from Old French jalousie, which means enthusiasm, love, longing. And from jealous, meaning keen or zealous. Zealous. Middle English, in a sense, means solicitude. It means solicitude. Solicitude means care or concern for someone or something. You know, like a mother is jealous for her child. You know, she doesn't want anyone to harm her child. She's, you know, you can use the word zealous. She's zealous to protect that child, okay? So, is that necessarily something wrong? No. She's jealous in that she's zealously protecting her child from any kind of harm or danger. Okay, you see this in the animal kingdom, but you always also see it in human beings. Let's go put that slide back up, please. It means care or concern for someone or something, carefulness and regard. It means watchfulness. Watchfulness. Jealousy actually means watchfulness. Meaning, it also means zeal, fervor, and devotion. Zeal, fervor, and devotion. Zeal is like a burning desire, okay? Now, that burning desire can actually be to protect somebody. You know, parents, I gave you the definite, you know, I gave you the example of parents being jealous for their children or zealous to protect their children from any kind of harm, okay? Is that a negative thing? No, it's not. But for the most part, jealousy, you know, it's that sexual possessiveness or suspicion. Okay? Now, a lot of people suspect things, and a lot of times, as we're going to learn later on in the next chapter, it's all in their mind. It can actually all be in your mind. It can actually, jealousy, you could be jealous. You could have that feeling of jealousy because you had thoughts that something was taking place, and then you started having this feeling of jealousy come over you. And you could actually be wrong. There might actually be nothing going on in a situation, okay? But if there is something going on, does that give you the license to, you know, bring harm or start yelling and screaming at, you know, your mate because you're jealous of something that took place? Does that give you the license to become angry and start lashing out or, you know, start stalking that person around or start threatening that person or anything like that? Does that give us the right to do that? Do we ever have the right to do that? No. In the peaceful solution, that's not an option. It's not an option. Remember, you choose the positive option. Well, how could that be handled in a positive way? Well, that's what you need to, you know, that's why it's important to have counselors. You know, you can go to your school counselor and deal with that situation, talk to your school counselor, talk to your parents about how to handle that emotion properly, okay? What your options might be in that situation. Because remember, people's reputations have been damaged, and some people have been hurt and even killed because of that emotion. Okay, so remember, people experience the emotion of jealousy for many reasons, okay? Sometimes the reason isn't what you think. It's not the sexual possessiveness. Sometimes it's the being zealous for something, like zealous to guard and protect something, as an example. Okay, so now let's get into the emotion of love. It says love can be one of the most difficult emotions to explain. Before we go into it, let's go ahead and look where on page 32, just a page over here, because if you notice, love is under positive emotions. So why on earth is it in this list right here? Why do we need to control that? I thought it was a great thing, right? Well, it can be, right? If it's controlled. Remember, Chris told us, you know, even positive emotions need to be controlled. You know, we got to control all of our emotions. You know, he gave the example, and I don't want to spoiler alert, the boy jumping up and down and knocking over a vase when he found out he won $100, and he knocks over his mom's best vase, and now he's got to pay for the vase he just broke. And it probably costs about $100, right? So now he just lost his $100 he just won, right? Or, I like to give the example of, people become joyful because their basketball team won or their football team won the championship. So they go out in the street and they start lighting cars on fire and shooting guns in the air and turning cars over and rioting and looting. And really? That's a positive thing? No, you got to control the emotion. You got to control your joy, okay? Or whatever it is. Okay, so let's talk about love. It says, love can be one of the most difficult emotions to explain. Many people misunderstand love because of the way it's portrayed in movies, TV shows, and romance novels. So let's put up the next slide, please. All right, here's some examples of how this is some of the examples of how it's portrayed. You got the sappy love songs they play on, on the radio. They call them love songs, and then they have romance novels like this one here, Ugly Love, Ugly Love, I guess might be romance gone bad or something here, right? And, movies like the Titanic, that was a big multi, I think over a couple $1 billion movie they made off this thing. And they portrayed love in a certain way in that movie, okay? And, I like to think that when you see that ship going down, the Titanic, it's kind of like the way their uncontrolled love ends. It doesn't have a great ending, okay? It goes down, it sinks down to the bottom of the ocean. It's a disaster, okay? If it's not controlled, if this emotion is not controlled properly, it can be a disaster. So let's continue to read on page 33. It says, love is an intense affection for another is one popular explanation. Attraction based on sexual desire is another. Now, that word desire, sexual desire, we probably need to talk about that a little bit. But let me see if I can. Okay, let's go ahead and go back to page 32 for a minute. Let's look at page 32 and let's look at the word love and look at the definition of love. It says, love is feeling a strong concern for someone or something arising out of care. Arising out of care. A strong concern for someone arising out of care. Now, I'm going to go back to page 8 of the character unit. The character unit. See the word care there in the character, right? True care and concern is what I'm talking about here. Positive character. And we're looking at page 8, and I'm going to read to you about morality or moral principles. It says, moral principles in regard to human life means acknowledging and accepting life is valuable and all people have the potential to contribute to society. When you have a moral attitude toward others, you accept and appreciate that they have the right to live in peace, safety, and security. You can demonstrate a moral attitude by being respectful toward all people. Now get this, remember this. This means not taking advantage of others, but rather showing them care and concern. Now, care and concern, showing them true care and concern. Now, look at love again, feeling a strong concern for someone or something arising out of care. True care and concern for somebody. Now, let's go to the next slide because we want to look at this emotion of peaceful. It's 2-3 down from love on page 32. You can read it in your book or you can read the screen. Peaceful means free from hostility or conflict, freedom from worrisome thoughts or emotions, the desire to always treat others as you would desire them to treat you. Now that word desire, okay? Desire is synonymous or a synonym of the word lust. Lust. You've heard of lust, okay? Lust is to have an intense desire or need. To have an intense desire or need. Now, I know most of the time when people mention that word lust, they think sexual lust. That's not what the word lust means. It means to have an intense or a burning desire or need. Now, is that wrong? No, you just got done reading here about peaceful. Peaceful emotion, or it's a positive emotion, and it means the desire to always treat others as you would want to be treated. That desire, it's a lust. It's actually a lust to treat others the way you would like to be treated in a situation. Now, why am I harping on lust and desire? Because I want you to know they're synonymous. I want you to know it means the same thing. It just simply means an intense desire or need. Now, if you desire, let's go back to the word love here. It says, or actually on page 32, love means a feeling of strong concern for someone or something arising out of care. Not out of lust, sexual lust, or selfish desires, but out of the desire to really help somebody or really do something to build somebody up to help them become a better person. There's nothing wrong with desiring that, with actually craving that, with lusting after doing the right thing. But, you know, it's kind of like this. Let's say you're driving down the road and you see somebody's got a flat tire, right? And it's some girl. Right? And you're thinking, man, I go help that girl, man. I can be Superman and save the day and go help that, you know, man, she's a pretty girl too. I think I'm going to help her. You know, I might get something from her. She might give me something if I help her. But remember what it just said here, right? Remember what it said about on page 8 of the character unit about not taking advantage of others, but showing them care and concern, true care and concern. You don't do it because you have this sexual desire in you and you think, oh, wow, she's really pretty. I better go help her. But then you're driving down the road and you see some guy with a flat tire and you're like, oh, man, that guy's on his own. You know, I like guys. But if that was a girl, boy, I'd sure pull over and give her a hand. Does that show true care and concern? This isn't real, man. It's not real. Okay, it's actually the opposite of what love truly is. It's showing you that we have a very a wrong perception of love. Now, I want you to remember that word lust means desire. Okay, now let's continue the reading here. It says, although there are various definitions of love, this emotion, if not handled properly, can result in inappropriate behavior. Adolescence is typically the time when your perception of the opposite gender goes from yucky to not so bad after all. Look at the next slide. You go from this, you know, the He-Man Woman Haters Club. No girls allowed. You remember that when you were about 7 or 8, you know, you had your tree fort or your little boys club somewhere and you were like, no girls are allowed in our club. But then when you turn 13, the He-Man Woman Haters Club, you know, you put another little sign out there that said Ladies Night every Tuesday. Right? You know, because as you get older, you started thinking, hey, you know, those girls, they're not really so bad after all, you know? It changes as you get older. Remember, your values change. Remember what we learned in the character unit about values? Now, is there anything wrong with necessarily valuing the opposite gender? No, nothing wrong with that at all. But it has to be done the appropriate way. You know, there's certain steps that we have to take in order to do things the right way, as we're going to learn here in just a moment as we continue reading. It says, suddenly you find yourself interested in someone you never really noticed before. This sudden interest gets a lot of people confused, and this takes place even in elementary school. Man, I remember when I was in first grade. I remember when I was in kindergarten having these kind of feelings about girls. I remember my first grade girlfriend, Mary Christopherson, sitting right next to me. I can picture it today. I remember my teacher, Mrs. Ward, telling me, will you stop staring at her? After school, we went home together and watched cartoons. Nobody thought anything of it, 6, 7, 8 years old, 5, 6, whatever the age was. Nobody thought anything of any of this. And you know what? I remember doing certain things with that little girl that adults did when they were married. Not anything like really, but what sometimes kissing or holding hands, right? These things took place at a very early age. You know why? I'll tell you why. Because some things are very misunderstood, as we're going to see here in a minute. It says, they think that being interested in someone means they have to touch them. This is wrong, it says. This is wrong. This false concept of love accounts for approximately 1 million teen pregnancies every year. And at least 1/4 of those pregnancies end in abortions, numbering 274,000. Well, let's look. Let's look at the facts about abortion in the year 2019 here. It says, based on available state-level data, and not all states reported in 2019, a few states didn't, I think because of, I don't know why, but it says 872,000 abortions in 2018. Whoa, that's quite a leap from what you're seeing on this page right here, isn't it? 872,000 abortions, okay, in 2018. And who knows, it might be actually higher than that. We don't really know about how this reporting goes. Okay, it says, in addition to the abortions, every year about 3 million teens acquire sexually transmitted diseases. Some of these diseases have no cure. Remember, it's diseases. We talked about that a few classes back. Pronounce it right, so that way you know what's causing it. Dis means not. Ease means not at ease. That means, another word for ease is peace, right? So if you're not at peace, it means there's some kind of principle in the peaceful solution that wasn't practiced, so we brought some kind of dis-ease in our mind or in our body. And in this case, we're talking about sexually transmitted diseases, which are transmitted through sexual contact, okay? Let's go to the next slide. When I was growing up, we called it venereal disease. We didn't call it STDs. They call it STDs today, but we called it VD when I was growing up. And there was a VD clinic in every town, and everybody knew about it. Okay, they knew where to go if they got a VD or a venereal disease. As you see here, you know what that actually is on that palm of that hand? This might make you think twice before you want to shake someone's hand. That's called syphilis. That's called syphilis on somebody's hand. That's only one of about 124 other sexually transmitted diseases that are out there. It's on the hand? Well, that actually means that you can actually contract that by shaking someone's hand that actually has it. So you don't even have to have sex with that person to get that disease. Okay? And there's many, many more that you can get by touching, kissing, etc. That people think, that's not a big deal if we kiss, we're not really going all the way. Well, what about herpes? What about other, oral diseases you can get from sexually transmitted diseases, okay? Now, that word venereal, let's look at it. It means a disease typically contracted by sexual contact with a person already infected a sexually transmitted disease. So a venereal disease is a sexually transmitted disease. Let's go to the next slide. The word venereal, it means from Latin venereus, of Venus, of or relating to sexual desire or sexual activity. Now, I'm sure you all know, or you're going to learn, if you're in middle school right now, you're going to learn, they're fixing to teach you about the Roman gods and mythology. And they're going to teach you that Cupid was the son of Venus. Okay? Cupid, the little fat chubby boy that's got the arrow on Valentine's Day shooting his heart. You see the heart there. Can you put that back up on the screen? You see the Valentine candy? I remember giving Mary, my girlfriend in first grade, I remember giving her these very things right here. In fact, they told us we needed to bring candy to school on Valentine's Day so we could share it with the girls. The boy could share with the girls could share with the boys. We could make them cards, and we could tell them, I love you. Right? I love you. Did any of us even know what that is? Was anybody explaining to us what it was? The only thing we knew about love was kissing, holding hands, right? Or, puppy love, they called it, with little children. It was called puppy love because they're real young. And Donny Osmond. I remember when I was in, kindergarten, first grade, Donny Osmond had a song called Puppy Love. It was a big hit. It was like a #1 hit. So they made it sound so okay, But it started with this. It started with the giving of the candy and they made us think that, it was okay to just tell any old girl you want, I love you, and give her a card and, try to win her over somehow, right? Well, this is what led to the venereal diseases, the STDs, because nobody was taught moral character, so they took advantage of the girls. They took advantage of the girls, and they took advantage of girls took advantage of the boys. Well, he's not very great looking, but he's got a fat wallet, and I like his car, He's got a great car. I don't mind, I can put up with how ugly he is as long as I can drive in that car, And he's got a lot of money. And I need some extra school clothes, Taking advantage of each other. All it was just like this big game, what we could get from that other person, Because remember, it's unbridled. It's unbridled lust, It's not bridled. It's not controlled because nobody was teaching us any control. No one was even teaching us we needed to control it. For the most part, we were taught in elementary school, don't touch, keep your hands to yourself, keep your feet to your, don't touch in elementary school for the most part. Now, after school, when we went home, we were allowed to do it because no one was watching us, right? For the most part. Now, when we got into middle school, and I know because I walk into middle schools, we teach at middle schools, and I see children in corners and closets and everywhere holding hands, kissing, and I see teachers going by not saying a word. Now, why? Why did it change so quickly from, elementary school? Intermediate school, middle school is just a step above. How all of a sudden did it change? Like, we don't have to keep our hands and our feet to ourselves now? We can just touch whoever we want? Remember, we just read. Suddenly you find yourself interested in someone you never really noticed before. This sudden interest gets a lot of people confused. They think that being interested in someone means they have to touch them. This is wrong. And this is what's leading to the unwanted pregnancies, the teen pregnancies, the teen abortions, okay? Thousands upon thousands of children being murdered daily because people don't want that child. They're unwanted. So it says, so if you think you love someone, control your emotions. Remember, true love is not instant. It's not love at first sight. You heard that? That's another misconception. Love at first sight? Really? You love someone when you look at them. No. Remember that other word I just told you about? It's called lust. Remember that word lust? It means a desire. So when you see someone and you like what you see, you're actually desiring that person. You're not loving that person. And I don't care what Hollywood tells you and what the movie industry tells you and the music industry portrays when they sing about love. Okay? It's not love. Okay? It's not love they're singing about. They're singing about lust. They're singing about sexual attraction. They're not singing about love. They can call it what they want, but that's not what it is. Okay? It says, true love is a bond of mutual trust, interest, and deep caring for another. True lasting love is based on the principles of moral character you're learning in this course. It takes time for a bond like this to form between people. Get to know that person through taking them home and sleeping with them. Oh, wait, hold on. That's got the wrong book. That's that Harlequin romance novel I just read, right? That's not what it says, does it? It says, let's read it again. It says, it takes time for a bond like this to form between people. Get to know that person through conversation, whether you're under adult supervision or if you're an adult yourself. Through conversation. You know, I remember watching a Oprah Winfrey, and it had a guy on there. He was he wanted to date a Muslim girl, and he was an American, and he went to the Muslim dad's. You know, he went to their home because the girl told him, well, you can't take me out anywhere. You have to have my father's permission to even talk to me. So the boy was like, what? So he went to the dad's house, and he knocked on the door, and he asked if he could talk to his daughter. The daughter was inside. He says, sure, you can talk. You can talk to my daughter. But, you know, he wanted to know, are you interested in marrying my daughter? And he was like, yes, I'd possibly like to marry her one day. So he came in the house, and I guess he thought he was going to take her out to the movies or something. And he got in the house, and the father and the mother were sitting there on the couch. And they said, well, our daughter's right there in the dining room, right there at the table there, and you can go talk to her. And he's like, okay. Well, what he found out was he wasn't taking her anywhere. He had to talk to her right there and have conversation with her in front of the parents where they could actually see what was going on so no hanky-panky would take place. And you know what that man actually figured out after this episode? He said, you know, at first I thought it was really strange that people do that. But he said, now I realize how I was being protected and how his daughter was being protected. And it kept me from doing anything with that person that other people would normally do. And he did end up marrying the girl after a while, after, you know, they had conversation, they got to know each other, you know, and a bond of mutual trust developed. Okay? It wasn't love at first sight. Okay? But there was a desire there to get to know that person and see if possibly they were compatible, right? Okay, so moving in with a person or having premarital sexual relations is not the way to find out if you're compatible for a life together. A person without moral values can cause daily stress on a person who's trying to do what's right. A person whose mind is constantly on gaiety or partying can cause mental anguish to a person whose mind is on peace. If suitable characters are matched, disagreements and divorce are rare. Like in the next final slide, you see the divorce rate in India where marriages are arranged by the parents? 2%. Where in most countries, the divorce rate is over 50%. In America, I think it's over 60%. Now, the marriages are arranged, but the parents find suitable matches for their children. They don't force them to get married. They still have a choice. But if they go with their parents' instructions, it normally works out, you know? So, you know, I bet you love at first sight doesn't work too well in the Muslim countries where the women wear veils, you know? I bet you love at first sight doesn't take place there. But anyway, it's a great form of protection, you know, to follow the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program. And, you know, I'm sure that the next teacher is going to go into this even more. But you've all been a really great class. Our time is up. And thank you for coming tonight. And we'll see you in the next class. The next class will be on Let's see. 3/16/2022. Got to tell you the year too. At 5:30 p.m. Central Standard Time. We'll see you then.